The biggest cost of depending on the electrical grid is not always the number printed on your monthly bill. It is the fact that nearly every important electrical function in your home depends on a system you do not control. Most people notice the financial side first. The electric bill arrives, the number seems higher than expected, and the obvious response is to use less power. Lights get turned off more carefully. Thermostats get adjusted, appliances are used less often, chargers are unplugged, people become more conscious of every device that consumes electricity because they assume lower usage should solve the problem. Sometimes those changes help, but the frustration begins when the household is already trying to conserve electricity and still feels heavily dependent on the utility. You can reduce consumption. You can change your habits, you can become more efficient, but you still need electricity. The refrigerator still needs power, phones still need charging, internet equipment still needs electricity. Lighting, heating, cooling, cooking, and many other household functions remain connected to the same external source. This means the cost of grid dependence exists on two levels. The first is obvious, you pay for the electricity you use. The second is easier to ignore, your home depends on that. Electricity remaining available. When the grid is working normally, this dependency feels almost invisible. Power arrives through the wall, appliances operate, and there is little reason to think about the infrastructure behind it. Then the power goes out. Suddenly, the financial question becomes a reliability question. The refrigerator stops cooling, the freezer is running only on the cold already stored inside, phones are operating on their remaining battery, the Wi-Fi router shuts down unless it has another power source. Basic lighting disappears. If someone depends on temperature-sensitive medication, refrigeration can become more important very quickly. At that moment, the real cost of grid dependence becomes much easier to see. It is not simply what you pay when electricity is available, it is what happens when electricity is unavailable. Most households respond to a blackout with reasonable steps. They keep the refrigerator closed, they use flashlights, they reduce unnecessary phone use, they wait for information, they hope the outage ends before food, medication, communication, or other important functions become a problem. Those actions are logical, but none of them changes the underlying structure. The home still has one primary source of electricity. That is where the conversation about energy independence often becomes confusing. People hear the phrase and imagine completely disconnecting from the electrical grid. That sounds extreme. It can make the entire idea seem unrealistic for an ordinary household. But there is another way to think about it. The real issue isn't completely abandoning the grid. It's having no alternative when the grid becomes expensive or unavailable. That distinction matters. A household does not necessarily need to replace every watt of electricity it normally uses in order to reduce dependence. It may only need another layer capable of supporting selected priorities. Imagine a blackout where the goal is not to keep normal life completely unchanged. Instead, the goal is to protect refrigeration, keep phones charged, maintain basic lighting, support communication equipment, preserve electricity for the devices that matter most. That is a much different challenge from trying to run an entire home normally, and once the goal becomes smaller, compact backup and alternative energy systems become easier to evaluate realistically. But there is an important limitation. Every system still needs energy from somewhere. A battery stores electricity. It does not create unlimited electricity. A generator converts another energy source into electricity. A system designed to reduce grid consumption must obtain useful energy from another source if it is going to replace electricity that would otherwise come from the utility. That sounds simple, but it is one of the most important questions to ask when evaluating any alternative power solution. Where does the energy actually come from? Then comes the next question. How much can the system deliver? A compact device may support small electrical loads more easily than large ones. Phones, efficient lights, and communication equipment may place relatively modest demands on a backup source. A refrigerator creates a different challenge. Larger heating, cooling, and cooking appliances can require significantly more power. The physical size of the power system does not tell you everything you need to know. Output matters. Available energy matters. Runtime matters. The number of connected appliances matters. A system could successfully operate several devices for a short period and still run out of available energy sooner than expected. Or it could have enough stored energy but lack the output required to handle a demanding appliance. That is why the useful comparison is not simply grid versus off-grid. It is complete dependence versus controlled alternatives. Think of the electrical grid like a single road leading to your home. When the road is open, everything moves normally. There is little reason to think about another route. But if that road closes, the problem is not that roads are bad. The problem is that there is no second route. Backup power works in a similar way. It does not have to replace the primary system to add value. It creates another path. That path may be smaller. It may have limited capacity. It may only support specific devices. But it changes the household from having one option to having more than one. And that is where the financial side becomes connected to the reliability side. If a legitimate alternative energy source supplies electricity that the household would otherwise purchase from the grid, it may reduce grid consumption. If a system simply stores electricity that originally came from the utility, its role is different. It may still provide backup during an outage. But storing grid electricity is not the same as creating an independent energy source. Understanding the distinction prevents unrealistic expectations. It also makes it easier to evaluate claims about dramatic electricity savings. The important question is always the mechanism. What produces or stores the energy? What does the system actually support? How long can it operate? What happens when the stored energy is depleted? Those questions are more useful than focusing on a headline percentage or a dramatic promise. For some families, the main concern may be electricity costs. For others, it may be outages. For others, it may be protecting food, medication, communication, or basic household functions during emergencies. The right level of independence depends on which problem the household is actually trying to solve. That is the broader perspective. Dependence on the electrical grid is not automatically a problem. The grid makes modern household life possible. The vulnerability appears when there is no meaningful alternative. A family can continue using grid electricity while still exploring ways to reduce how completely every essential function depends on it. That might mean understanding backup systems. It might mean identifying essential electrical loads. It might mean evaluating alternative energy sources. It might simply mean recognizing which parts of the household become vulnerable when electricity disappears. The financial bill tells you what electricity cost this month. Grid dependence tells you what losing that electricity could cost when you need it most. There is a structured breakdown in the description for anyone who wants to explore practical home energy alternatives more carefully. Subscribe for more clear explanations about backup power, grid dependence, and household energy systems. Greater control begins with understanding what your home actually depends on.